All right, we've been there. We've had a player at the table that is just out of control, a real problem for the rest of the group. Or worse, you sit every night with a DM who is absolutely impossible and you don't know what to do. So we're talking about that today. We're talking about people in the game who are problematic for whatever reason. And we've got some special guests. See you soon. Hey everybody, welcome to iCast Guidance, your Dungeons & Dragons podcast, where every week, Garrett and I take a ruler mechanic in the game of D&D that's lackluster or needs improvement, and we offer you advice on how to make your game around that rule more interesting or more fun. So, sharpen up those daggers. We're getting started right now. Okay, welcome everyone. Today, Garrett, he's kind of recovering from a late into the night wedding. So we're without Garrett today. However, I'm happy to have and introduce my two guests today, both Eric and Atticus Fiorito. How you two doing?
Hey, how's it going?
We're vibing. How are you?
I'm doing okay. So I'm kind of excited to get talking about this today. And I love the fact that both of you are absolutely seasoned D&D players and DMs across the board, but can we maybe just introduce ourselves and talk a little bit about who we are and what we do? Eric, you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah. I'm Eric, and I started playing D&D when I was a junior in high school. That was, back in the 90s, or no, actually, it's even older than that, back in the 80s. Played for a couple of years with a few friends, but kind of dropped it when I went into school, college, that is, and then went into a world of no much fun at all and stopped playing for a number of years and then got back into it when 5e came around, probably about 10 years ago. Really started jumping in with a few other friends. At that point, was like, there's something that's cool to do with my kids, so maybe they'd like to play that. And Atticus got brought into the fold with a lot of my older friends and forced them to grow up and hear a lot of horrible things way before they should have. But
well, I mean, I had no friends other than that. So
yeah, you had my friends by defact.
Yeah. So it all worked out.
I think this works like a lot of people, how they get into D&D is we started out with no friends.
Which is fine. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. That's our community, and that's a good thing. It's a strong thing. It's a bond.
Exactly.
It's a bond that we all need to embrace.
But Addie, what about some of your D&D experience? Tell us a little bit about you.
Well, I mean, I've been playing since I was roughly 13. Started out as a player, of course, in that massive campaign that my dad got me into. Soon after that, I felt like there was a little bit of a drought in me playing personally. So I was like, what if I started to try and run games? So I got a couple of my friends together, or tried to at least, and I kind of just dipped my feet into DMing and then stayed playing as well, and kind of went back and forth for a number of years all throughout high school. Theater and D&D have kind of been my main creative outlets, especially with DMing. That's been really great, and I've stuck with it. Now that I'm in college, I've been continuing playing it. I've met a lot of really great people through small theater and D&D communities, so having those two kind of intertwine has been really awesome, and I've really loved playing D&D with other theater people because of how in character everybody gets, and I feel like the kind of feeding of energy back and forth between a DM and a party is like nothing I've ever felt before. It's really awesome.
I gotta touch on this right now, and I feel like this is going to be a future episode that you and I actually do together, because I see a lot of negativity around, I'm going to put air quotes around this, theater kids in D&D.
Yeah.
And I'm absolutely certain that the people that are giving that negativity are people that have insecurities about not being able to delve into role play too deep.
Yeah.
And I have a problem with that. Like, I want to talk about that more, because I feel like that's something I want to work to sort of overthrow.
Yeah.
I don't think that negativity is necessary. I feel like I'm an advocate for playing your own game. Right? Totally. I love having theater people at my table. And I also have people at my table that are not theater people and play much more third person. And I love having those people too. So, so I love that. But I'm glad you brought that up because I want to talk about that down the road.
Yeah, sign me up.
Are you suggesting that there's a cultural and class structure in the layout of who plays D&D? Like, who's really shitting on theater people in the D&D table? You would never expect a D&D player to be like, no, I don't want to play with a theater person.
It's funny,
just
isn't it?
geeks. They're theater geeks. I don't want to play with that.
Well, I mean,
we all know it's about the insecurity because theater people are pretty damn awesome.
Well, the irony in all of that is that this game grew out of people that were marginalized and underrepresented. That's who we all were growing up. And now, if anybody's out there throwing shade at any group that plays this game, then shame on you. That's just absolutely not.
I'm wagging an adult finger in your general direction.
Exactly. I like that, wagging the adult finger. All right, so, like our show today focuses on, ironically, problematic DMs and problematic players.
Oh, yeah.
Which, I'm excited to get into talking about this. And I've seen a lot, I've read a lot online, but, I think we all come from individual experiences that we can all talk about, what do we do here? I know that we all have different experiences in this realm, but, just to kind of lay it out and how we balance the commentary here, I'm almost a forever DM, right? Addie, you're both on both sides of the fence. You both DM and play. And Eric, you're almost exclusively a player.
Yeah, pretty much. I love to play.
So we've got a good balance of opinions here, but I want to start off with problematic players. I think it's a good time for stories, personally.
Sure.
So we could talk about people that have been problematic players without naming names.
That's going to be fun.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, yeah. Coming up with the
and therein lies the biggest
names.
Challenge of today's podcast.
Yeah. Hey, we're not here to air out dirty laundry.
No.
That's right. If you think, I'm going to put this out there, if you listen to this podcast and you think I'm talking about you, I'm not. This is my Carly Simon moment where I say you probably think this podcast is about you, don't you? Don't you? But what do you got for me? Tell me about an experience that you had, either one of you. Tell me about an experience you had with a problematic player.
Do you want to go first or should
No,
I?
you go take it away because you've dealt with a lot more. Like I like the idea of it coming from DM all the time to DM player to player. I think that's a pretty interesting thing. But the one thing I do want to say before we even go down this rabbit hole is that, and it kind of touches on what we were just talking about. D&D to me, like the biggest rule about it is we're here to have fun and we're here to enjoy things and enjoy each other. And that's where I always find the most problem coming from is when it's like it becomes something else.
Yeah.
And that's like, just be a good human being, and we'll all have a fucking great time.
I could not agree more. I think that's a great place for us to start from and probably end on also, right? I love that. But Addie, what do you got?
Let's see. Okay. A big thing that I kind of tend to think about when I think of problematic players are breaches of comfortability. There was a game that I ran online during I think the height of COVID. So of course everybody was playing online at that point. And for better or for worse, there was a game that I had where it was, funny enough, it was another nautical campaign. So there were a couple different problematic elements. I had two players who were in a relationship at the time and had their characters also in a romance. So when you've got that level of character bond out the gate, that's bound to potentially make some folks uncomfortable, including me as the DM, because when you're trying to go through with the kind of fade to black type of moments, and then you have a third player who comes in and insists on interrupting those moments for comedic effect, thus breaching the comfortability of those two players who were having their characters in a romance, and also breaching the comfortability of everybody else at the table having to now deal with this player coming in and trying to interrupt a quote-unquote moment. So that, as a DM, when it comes to players who are comfortable with one another, especially comfortable enough with one another, to have that kind of character dynamic, it can be a bit of a double-edged sword, because that comfortability may not be shared or felt around the table. And I think that's one of the things that really should come up in a session 0, where you have conversations about, is this an okay element to include in the game, or are people at the table going to feel uncomfortable because of it?
So establishing a level of consent in session 0 seems like a
Absolutely.
way to combat that.
Well,
which is pretty cool.
Yeah, and which I completely 100% agree. I wonder if, just to try and look at the flip side of the coin here, I wonder if the session 0, which I think is a must, can solve every problem where this is concerned, right? Because we might sit in a session 0 and be sitting in with two of our friends that are in a relationship, and then they offer up this idea that their characters are going to be in a relationship. Is that okay with the comfort zones of everyone at the game? But then we get to the moment where it's happening. And I'm not saying that anything explicit is necessarily happening here, but we get to that moment. And then I wonder about the person who had to interject for comedic effect.
Yeah.
If this was some kind of knee-jerk reaction in their own discomfort that was just sort of like,
Their own
I got to
coping
bust this
mechanism.
tension somehow and make a joke.
Yeah.
Right? So comfort levels are weird things because we don't know exactly what we're good with and what we're not until we're there.
That makes complete and total sense to me. I think coming from the perspective of the person who was running that game, from the perspective of someone who runs games, I think establishing the level of consent, but then also acknowledging the fact that it's an unpredictable kind of a thing is something that can be huge for a session 0. To just outwardly mention, hey, how does everybody cope with uncomfortability? How does everybody deal with moments that they don't feel okay in? Will they address the group and step away from the table for a second? Will they actively interrupt and try and shut down whatever's happening? Or will they react in a respectable or disrespectful way?
Right.
Or will they sit in the corner rocking back and forth saying, I need an adult, I need an adult, I need an adult.
Well, yeah,
Exactly.
There's going to be a few of those. Yeah, I agree. And I think session 0 obviously is going to help to flesh most of that out. And as we'll kind of, I think, talk about possibly when we get on to DMs in a little while, there is also the notion that there might just be someone who, if you have 5 people at your table plus a DM and everybody's in agreement with the romantic situation except for one, what do you do there? Because I think this is where tables run into problems, right? Do you, A, suggest that this is not the right table for that person and that maybe this game, maybe they're in for the next game because this one's just not going to work? Or B, do you force the other 2 people at the table to tamp down the romantic interaction? In other words, how do we find the balance for the comfort zones? And I mean, of course, it's about a conversation. It's about getting everyone on the same page and agreeing. But I've seen it where it's kind of like it becomes difficult. I think especially for DMs sometimes who have a hard time managing these conversations, right? It's hard to manage a conversation like that. You got a lot of feelings on the line. You're asking everyone to be vulnerable for a moment and say, this bothers me. That's vulnerability, right?
Yeah.
And now you're managing that vulnerability. That's tough.
And, it's kind of a double-edged sword, too, because a lot of the reason why people come to the table in the first place is to not deal with these types of things because maybe there's something going on in their personal life that they want to escape from. And then suddenly they're, I just broke up with somebody that I've been with for years, and now there's 2 other characters that are, like, fully in love, and I'm playing with them, and I'm like, oh, my God, I just want to go jump off a bridge. That's not something that you can predict, and it kind of comes up in the moment, but at the same time, you don't want to ask those 2 other players to tamp down their own creativity and whatever expression that they're coming to the table for, too. So it's a really tricky scenario. And one of the reasons why I prefer to be a player and not have to come up with the way to manage these things like you DMs have to deal with.
Right. Well, because D&D is passive therapy, right?
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
It's passive therapy. And when it has to become active therapy, where, somebody's got to get in there and say, look, I know that those 2 people being in love you're having a hard time with that because you just broke up with someone after a long relationship, but maybe you could embrace this and make this part of your character, and your utter despair over seeing those 2 could be something that this is not the place for that.
I absolutely agree.
I just want to kill monsters, man.
I mean, and if that's therapeutic, that's therapeutic. I think the thing is when you've got that insane divide of 2 players who are having their characters with that kind of relationship, and then one person at the table who is so specifically against that, or not even just against that, or is just so completely and totally uncomfortable with it. I think finding the compromise between allotting for some of that uncomfortability to be resolved while not dampening other players' fun is so key. I think it lies in player specifics. If there is one specific activating moment or phrase or type of activity for that player who is uncomfortable, then that is a thing that can be avoided.
Right.
Simultaneously, if there is something specifically that the players whose characters are in a relationship are chasing, if there is a specific moment that they are attempting to reach with that character arc and that other person is uncomfortable with that, the boundary is there. And that boundary, although it should be respected, does not necessarily exist to cease or damper another individual's method of playing this storytelling game. Because in all, that's kind of what we're here to do, to tell a story. If certain aspects of a story are causing uncomfortability, then if there are aspects that can be changed to allot for more comfortability, I think they should, because everybody's fun matters.
Yeah, I'm totally down with that. And I mean, I think a really good example of one of those concrete, well-defined issues is with Olivia in our game. Olivia hates the notion of vomit. You can describe a death where someone's entrails spill out of their insides all over the ground, and it could be the most violent death a person could ever articulate, and Olivia's fine with that. But if you talk about the possibility of vomit, that one's going to send her right over the edge. So we know that we should probably avoid vomit, right? Eric, you got thoughts on a problematic player situation that you want to talk about?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've been privy to at a couple different tables is the challenging player, and not so much in that they're challenging to deal with, but that they're actually always challenging DM decisions. And that can be a little uncomfortable sometimes when you're sitting there and you're kind of like, oh boy, mom and dad are fighting. Whether it's a situation that someone debates a rule lawyer's observation about what they can and cannot do in that situation, or if it goes out to further discussion and it kind of interrupts the gameplay, but it also kind of breaks the camaraderie a little bit, and that can be really tricky. And I think, there's a certain part of that that's like people's personalities that they bring to the table. What's wonderful about D&D and what's also horrifying about it is that everybody is so intrinsically connected to their own personalities, and how those, even though you're role playing, you bring so much of yourself into all of your characters. So a lot of times that doesn't always jive. It doesn't always gel up. And, if you've got somebody that's wanting to always do the best sneak attack with the most amount of damage, and then the DM offers something that is counterintuitive to that, there can be that what do you mean I can't do that?
Right.
And that's, for me, that's always you're the game master, you're the dungeon master, you're running the whole show. Ultimately, you're going to have the final say in terms of what's going on. So there's got to be a little bit of that respect, but a healthy discourse can be good about things too, because we're all humans, right? So anybody can make a mistake, and that's one of the things that I love about playing with Utah, because we can have these quick little interjections of how do we evaluate this situation, and we can kind of just pop out of the game for 2-3 minutes and just be da 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 da, cool, everybody good, yeah, all right, boom, and then we get back into it. So I love that aspect, and that I think has been a really successful way. Not to say that anybody in our party is that challenging player that's always I call bullshit on that. I've been at tables where that happens, and then it's everybody leaves at the end of the night, and it's instead of high-fiving and being that was great, we had so much fun, that was really awesome, one person kind of storms off, and then everybody else is just standing there looking at each other what the hell just happened? And then it's that kind of can almost affect a group of friends outside of the game too. So that for me has always been one of the things that is really difficult to deal with. But again, it's that interpersonal interactions. It's about being a good human. So it's more often than not, it's not about your characters having issues or the players within the game having an issue with how the game's being run. It's who's coming to the table in the first place.
Right.
So that's...
Yeah. You just hit so many things on the head for me. In coming up to this episode, I was reading a ton about, different sort of anecdotal situations that I'd find online about, in Reddit, and somebody's I got this person at my table, here's a description. And then I'd be oh my God, and then I'd find another example. I don't have a situation like that at my table. So I'm so thankful for that, first of all. So you bringing up the fact that we're able to pop out of the game for 2 or 3 minutes, discuss an issue, and it can be an issue that's critical of me or a ruling or anything like that, and then we pop right back in. That has made me embrace, as a DM, I embrace that kind of, I won't even call it a challenge, I'll call it a dialogue, because it feels to me like now I know we're all on a page of trust. We can all work together and no one's going to get upset about that.
Right.
Now, that being said, I've had my moments in the past, I know. But at the end of the night, we're usually pretty good.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think on the subject of like having those moments, I feel like we're kind of all guilty of that. We are sort of going off of what you were saying. We're only human. We're going to have these moments of, I don't know if conflict is the right word, but where intentions of or methods of how we're going about playing this game differ. And if that causes a little bit of discourse, then yeah, that's a conversation that we've got to have.
It's also coming back to like, what are we looking for in playing the game at the beginning of the day or at the beginning of the session? Like, I might have a complete and utter shit day at work and I'm just frustrated with the universe and I'm looking for a way to get all that frustration out, not misplace any rage or frustration in places that I know will affect my life in a negative way in and of life itself. But when I come to the table, I might be like, oh man, I need to blow off some steam. I really need to just get into some crazy battle and beat the shit out of everything that comes my way and just vanquish it and get it out of my system. It's going to be a cathartic evening for me to just do that. And then I show up to the table and we're shopping for potions or dresses.
That's what I was going to say.
What the actual fuck? I want to kill something.
Right.
So that, I think, is one of the things that I actually love about playing D&D is that you rolling the dice, all pun intended, every night when you all sit down, because you don't know who had a great day, who had a shitty day, who is going to be really excited to do one thing and who's going to be really excited to do another thing. So it's like, that's what's awesome about it, and how that all kind of comes together for like that first half an hour of the game, and then we all kind of like settle into a groove. And then, we all eventually get on the same page.
Well, I'm going to say that that's awesome for you. I mean, and what you just described, where you're like, you had a shit day and you come to the table and you just want to bash things, in some way, and I don't mean this negatively at all, you're bringing your baggage to the table. You're bringing your day to the table. Now, how do you manage that? And you manage it very well, because if we all wind up potion shopping on the day you want to bash things, you're perfectly fine with that. Right? And maybe it didn't turn out exactly as you wanted, but I would imagine that 90% of the other players that are problematic out there that I'm reading these stories about are bringing that baggage to the table, and they're frustrated that they're not getting their way. They cannot leave the baggage behind for the benefit of everyone's fun, right? Yeah. At that point, it becomes just about them. And like you said, with such a heavy emphasis on the person's personality coming to the table, no matter what character they're playing, I would challenge any table to find someone who's a genuine sociopath in real life, come to the table and play a sort of all-forgiving, all-encompassing sage who loves everybody. Doesn't happen. The character's still going to be a sociopath, right? Yeah. And that's going to come out. So I think a lot of the problems come from how well does the person leave baggage, bring the baggage along, but then they're able to handle their baggage if they need to.
Use the baggage as flavor as opposed to the source.
Perfect.
And, like, is it really going to be a passive therapy day? Is it going to be the passive therapy session that I wanted it to be?
Right.
But if you leave that baggage behind or check it, lock it in the car,
you're probably going to be
you're probably going to have a lot better of a time.
All right, so we're going to come up with a few options at the end of this podcast. We're going to talk about how to make your game better and strategies for just sort of like dealing with some of these things. But we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about when DMs are problematic. I mean, I gotta share the love here and get onto those DMs.
Oh yeah.
So let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back.
See you in a bit.
Hello, esteemed listeners. I just wanted to take a minute to let you all know how much Garrett and I look forward to making this podcast for you every week. We work our butts off all week long, scouring the rules of D&D and looking for areas where you can improve your game. We also think a lot about how we tweak house rules in our own game to make things more exciting for us, and we bring that into the conversation. So, the best way you can support us right now is to like, follow, subscribe, download, and listen to this podcast every week. Also, tell your friends. If you have friends that listen to podcasts, let them know what you're listening to. Tell them this is, where it's at. Send them our way, and we send you our eternal thanks and gratitude for that. Now, don't want to keep holding on any longer, so let's get back to today's episode. All right, so I'm loving this conversation. I'm really having a good time with this. I've always wanted to tackle this. And, I feel like we've been throwing shade at players long enough. It's time for us DMs to accept some responsibility, which doesn't exclude you, Eric, from the conversation, because I know you've been in a few situations with shitty DMs.
Yeah, I have.
Yeah.
I've committed Harry Carey in the game.
Like literally at the table?
Jesus.
Not like with an actual blade, but,
This podcast is sponsored by TrueSwords.com.
Oh my God.
Come on, that was
If
awesome.
you're having feelings of being low, please find a good game to get into and use that as a personal therapy session.
Yes. Dungeons & Dragons is therapy. All right, so DMs. I mean, Addie, I'm going to throw this at you first. I have, of course, my own thoughts on this, but when the table has the problem with the DM, and the DM, and it's genuinely justified, it's not just somebody's chip on their shoulder. You got an example of this, or can you talk to that point?
So, when I think of a bad DM or of a questionable DM, I feel like the thing is that you've got, because in thinking about kind of that horror story aspect to like a bad DM, like I've seen the YouTube videos of the different stories of like, oh, my DM did this horrible thing in this game or this, that, and the other thing. I feel like when we're thinking about bad DMs, there are the DMs that are simply not proficient at running a game versus the DMs who actively use the game and manipulate the game and the act of playing the game in a more negative way. For example, if you've got a game where it's an online game and you have a DM who is totally and utterly and completely getting swept up in all the different technological aspects of the game rather than running the narrative or running the game itself, then you're going to have a table or a Discord call full of players who aren't necessarily having fun because the Dungeon Master's focus is instead on sort of the more technical aspect rather than the game. If you're spending time with music bots and digital battle maps rather than actually rolling dice and role-playing, then most likely your game is going to suffer. Alternatively, you could have a dungeon master who, I'm trying to figure out a way to properly word this without diving into a whole insane story, because this was something that I experienced. One of my very good friends and I wound up in a game where the dungeon master was using the game as a way to spend time with a person they were romantically interested in. And those feelings were not reciprocated. So you can imagine how that game went.
Oh, yeah.
Ew.
That's what I said.
Ew.
And so when you've got a dungeon master who is very simply not focused on the telling of the story and an interactive story and allowing the players to become the storytellers that they are, because really, as much as a DM is running the show and is kind of setting the scene and orchestrating the world, it is the act of handing the narrative to the players' characters that really defines the story. Yes, you're setting up all the building blocks, but you're giving the tools of putting the building blocks together to your players.
Yes, and can I jump off of that for 1 second?
Absolutely.
So, I think the biggest problem, especially new DMs make when they're homebrewing, and because it almost always comes out of that, right, is when a dungeon master writes a story rather than creates a framework. And I think these are the two delineating factors between what is railroaded and what has flexibility.
Yeah.
A dungeon master should create a framework for their players to develop the story in. If you're genuinely going to have a collaborative storytelling experience, then that's going to happen in a framework where everybody can participate in the telling of that story. But if you write a story where there are multiple story arcs that all have specific people at specific times in specific places with specific objects, and your players are just kind of extras in that story that you kind of manipulate through the field, no one's having a good time in that but you.
Yeah.
And eventually you're not going to have a good time either. That's
not
a
going to
crappy
have
DM.
friends afterwards too. I mean, I've been in that situation where there was a party of people that were playing. The DM had been experienced for years, was running a great game. Somebody in the party was like, hey, I really want to try to be a DM. And instead of taking on an early story that already has a written module that has that framework in place and kind of becoming more familiar with running a game in a different way, because let's face it, being a DM is a very big challenge. There's a lot of information that you have to have at your fingertips at all times. You got to be able to pivot. And if you are locked into your own story that you're trying to tell, it's impossible for you to pivot that way and let the story be held by your players. So this other situation that I was in, somebody went so far over into the realm of world building that they had created the story. They were so intent on proving how great they could be as a DM that they lost track of the fact that it wasn't fun for everybody else because of the fact that we had no agency in the situation. Everything was so written out and so completely preordained that, it was really tricky and not fun. And then when that person kind of picked up on that, they took it very, very personally because they put so much time and energy into it. And I got to say, shout out to every DM on the planet. I get it. You guys prep like banshees, and you have to. There's so much to consider. And I think that gets taken for granted by players a lot of the time. And I just want to say thank you for all the extra time that you put out outside of the table, all of you people, because you're amazing at that. But it's tricky when you are so intrinsically connected and married to your story that you can't let it change. So we wound up losing a good friendship because of that.
Yeah.
And
I
that
don't talk to that
sucks.
person anymore. And that's sad.
Yeah.
That's really sad.
Yeah, that sucks. And, I think I want all of the new DMs out there, or the fledgling DMs out there, to really, and this is a really hard question to answer for yourself, because you really got to be insightful and you got to think hard about this. What was the impetus for you to become a DM? Are you reacting to a DM that you've played with? And is that reaction oppositional? In other words, were you in a game with a DM that you felt like wasn't doing the job? Okay, that could be inspiration to become a better DM. But then you got to ask yourself, were they a bad DM, or did they just not do the DMing like you think it should be done? Or was your DM inspirational? In other words, did you find inspiring moments in the framework to go and now do that on your own? And I think those are two really fun, almost perfectly integrated things. You've got to be careful about what side of that you're on, because if you're reacting to another DM, that's, I think, a dangerous place to be for a dungeon master to create from, because
it's definitely a difficult springboard to start DMing from.
Right.
A difficult place to start, because your entire experience is colored by that.
Right. And on top of that, and this is going to be my shout out to you, Addie, in this, because my world building, I'll typically start with an extremely large framework, a planetary system down to a couple of continents, and then
freaking awesome.
And then maybe just a couple of systems of government that might be at opposition with one another. And then I'll say, all right, go, let's do this. And I allow you all to kind of just move at your own pace. My shout out to you was when you DM'd our campaign for that Kraken Week episode series that we did, because we had a limited time. And this is where I want to talk about the difference between the railroad and the sandbox really quickly for the DM, because you were able to keep us on point and moving through the scenario without it being too loose. I don't believe in Dungeons & Dragons there can be an effective, genuine sandbox. There has got to have. The DM is in a position of control. That control has to be wielded responsibly.
Yeah.
And you did it beautifully in that game because you kept us on point.
The thing I usually think about when DMing, especially a one-shot or just like a quick little three-parter like that, is the things that I make are, okay, we've got point A and point B. The players decide how they get there. However, there are going to be little catalyst events here and there that will spur them to that. For example, point A was you're starting on the ship, we're introducing the characters, and we're going to roleplay a little bit. Point B was that boss fight with the Dread Captain Arnvald. How do you get there? Okay, there are some people on this island. Why do you want to go to the island? Well, there is some mythology surrounding the island, so that gives you the impetus. The people on the island will tell you there's some weird shit happening on the island. If you want, you can investigate the island, which you did. And then you find the Ephraim coral for the first time, and that's when shit kicks up. Giving the players small little moments and new elements that are just awesome enough to keep them engaged will save the linearity of your storytelling.
Yeah, that framework you just laid out is perfect. It's like I've got a point A and a point B. I know we're going to get to point B. You decide how we're going to get there.
Yeah, and
right?
that's kind of part of putting together the building blocks and then giving your players the tools to build them how they see fit. I didn't know how you guys were going to get to the boss fight at the end, but you did it.
Right. And that's balance, right? That's balance between allowing the players to have their fun and allowing you to have that kind of loose, the hand of God over, getting to the end of the story, however that might decide to end. So ask yourselves, DMs out there, if you're listening to this, ask yourselves, do you get angry or frustrated when it doesn't go your way? And if you do, this could be a sign that your needle is too far on the railroad side of the gauge, right? That you might be yearning for too much control. And my players used to have a joke with me because most of the time I was so loose and open with my game that they had this joke running where I was like, let's get on a boat, because they knew I was totally not prepared for a boat, and that would be the ultimate flex to fuck up my game. Which would be, kind of hilarious. Eric, you had a story. Did you have a story about a bad DM, or was that the one you just told with the one that you were referring to?
That was one of them. Yeah. I mean, I've also been in stories or situations where, I keep coming back to this whole concept of like what happens socially outside of the game and how that affects what happens inside the game, or is that the impetus for it? And, I've been in situations where there's a DM that's really trying to elevate, I don't want to say social status, but like just feeling good about being a part of that group, whatever that group is, and then they're like, well, I can try to really excel at this. And so in their effort to like really create something that they feel everybody is having a great time at, they kind of over fixate on things and kind of lose track of we're all here to have fun aspect of it. If your players aren't having fun, what's the point, right? If we're not all collectively telling an enjoyable story, why'd be there? So I was in a situation where I couldn't get any spell components, try as I might, jumping through every hoop I could find to get everything that I needed to cast the spell. 3 or 4 sessions would go by and I'd be like, I've had this spell forever and I can't use it. Yeah. And it's like, I will go to the top of the roof and wait for the lightning to strike this twig. Please
cast Witch Bolt.
Let me cast Witch Bolt, damn it, And it wouldn't happen,
right.
And it was just like a frustrating thing that would happen time and time and time again. And it was like that aspect plus the person trying to process other things that are like daily activities that they didn't really engage in the outside world, but we're like, let's play with this in the inside world and see what it's like. And that kind of was a difficulty because the majority of the players were like, dude, I don't come here to pay taxes and run a household. Yeah, I do that already in the outside world. Right. I don't want to come in to do it here.
Yeah. And DMs, you got to like look for what your players want or need to enjoy this game. That's really important. Like, Eric, if you came to me on the side before our game started and said I had a shit day, I'm like, all right, you know what? Even though we're shopping, someone's going to come in and try and rob the place. And then you can fuck them up because then at least you get you get to bash for a while. So here's what we're going to do. I want to just, I want to switch gears here and move on to how we're going to make this better for people, because part of this podcast is about how to make your game at home better. So if you are experiencing a difficult player at your table, or you are experiencing a DM who needs a shift, what do we do in those situations? So we're going to get to that in 1 second. All right. So in terms of getting yourself primed to deal with the problem, okay? Now, we talked a little bit about session 0 earlier. This is obviously a sort of a pregame kind of remedy for a lot of this stuff. We can lay it all on the table. And I would recommend that anybody in session 0, number 1, talk about where you're vulnerable, talk about what bothers you. And number 2, if you're the DM for that session 0, make sure you get it out of your players. Like, these are the house rules. These are my expectations. What are yours? Right?
I think one of the things, like, speaking to that, like when we were playing Strahd and my character had a shift to be completely chaotic evil, you were like, is everybody okay with having a player at the table that is fully chaotic evil? And can you play it that way? So there was that communication that was outside of the game, but it was also like a, let's check in with consent. Like, and I think the 2 or 3 times that I've played with you where somebody has wanted to be a chaotic evil character in its entirety, you're like, how does everybody else feel about this? Because
my knee-jerk answer to that is no.
Right.
I mean, I've got a few full stops in my campaigns, and when someone says, I want to play a chaotic evil character, I default to no there. I've changed my mind a few times.
Well, I was really honored that you allowed me to go with that, because I think you were proposing that at this point in the game, my character having its alignment forcibly shifted would have brought it into you, and that would have been, you would have started playing that character as the DM. But the fact that you were like, if you're going to do it, you got to do it.
Right.
And that for me was one of the most challenging but most rewarding and entirely enjoyable situations.
You had to kill your or you had to attack your comrades.
Yeah, it was awesome. Yeah. It sucked, but it was great.
Right. And just to put this into context, it was when you were in the Amber Temple and the vestiges sort of didn't go your way, and all of a sudden now you're chaotic evil.
Right.
Which was freaking awesome, I think, in terms of the storyline.
And it made sense for his character. A lot of players kind of take flack for the whole, it's what my character would do. And granted, I'm just gonna flat out say it, 9 times out of 10, that's a bullshit excuse. However, there are certain moments where if you are in character and you commit to the bit, and if you do stuff, like if you are a chaotic evil character or if you are playing a chaotic evil character and you commit to really role-playing that alignment with everybody at the table's consent, then the role play should reflect the boundaries and the consent that are active at the table.
Still, yes, absolutely. That doesn't automatically erase what might have been decided on a year and a half prior at session 0, right?
Right. And that was mid-game, and I think to the point of it, like, what can you do to make your game better? It's having that dialogue. It's having that ability to kind of just hit the pause button in the role play and in the narrative and say, are we all okay with this?
Right.
Is this still going to work? And I think that's a perfectly acceptable thing to do. I mean, you're sitting down, you're eating snacks, you're having dinner together right before you play. Just run it past everybody.
Exactly. And I mean, I think one of the other things we need to talk about here in terms of making the game better, and what's amazing right now is, I'm not sure if we can hear this on the mics, our studio and Three Ducks Tavern is in the basement of a 175-year-old general store, and there's a cricket that has started to sing, and it's freaking phenomenal. I don't think the mics are picking that up. But
I can't mimic a cricket. No, it's horrible.
Well, it's pretty good though.
Mimicry cricket.
I think as well-intentioned people, and I'm going to say the 3 of us are well-intentioned people, and I'll assume you listeners out there would put yourselves in that camp as well, then we like to practice at our table some form of tolerance. And I think many of us, our tolerance, which is a beautiful thing, and I think it's a thing more people should exercise in the world today, but our tolerance runs up against the problematic situation. And we're like, okay, that's just who they are, and I should just deal with this. But after a while, it starts to rub you really hard, right? Yeah. So what do you do there? At what point where's the line drawn for what your tolerance will accept? Like at my table, racism, out. I have no tolerance for that, right? I'm a tolerant person, but there's things I won't tolerate, right?
I have a similar thing with sexual assault.
Okay.
That's a hard stop. That's a no.
Okay. So I think that's the question you ask at session 0. Where's the line drawn at your tolerance? Because some people are just like, hey man, anything goes. I'm like, we're going to have a hard time because I'm not an anything goes kind of person. I'm very flexible, but I'm not anything goes.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
What else? I read a lot online about how, I don't know what the right saying is here. I've seen it both ways. You tell me. No D&D is better than bad D&D, or bad D&D is better than no D&D. Now, if you've got a problematic player or DM at the table, that's bad D&D. But is it better than nothing? For some people, I think it is.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, where do we stand there?
Here's how I kind of feel about it. When you're thinking about bad D&D, and also with that level of boundary breaches and the whole anything goes kind of approach, there comes to a point where it stops feeling like a game of D&D, where you're sitting around at a table with your friends, you're rolling dice and you're playing a game. And then there potentially comes to a point where you feel like you're trapped in a narrative that you don't feel safe in. I've had that kind of a thing as a DM, where I felt trapped in a narrative that I was just eager to finish and get done. It comes to the point where it doesn't feel like you're playing D&D anymore. And in that respect, if your game is a space where you feel nothing but discomfort in, absolutely get out. Absolutely get out.
I agree. And at the same time, if there is a person who doesn't feel like they have the agency to get out, because a lot of people will sit through a problematic situation. You can look at a lot of people that are in abusive relationships that don't know how to get out, right? So a lot of people will sit in a game that they feel demeaned, like something's going on that bothers them, and they won't leave. That's a point where you should probably take your DM aside and talk to them about, like what's happening. And I think it's a point for the DM to also say, okay, where is this coming from, right? Like, yes, if you're feeling unsafe at a table, we got an issue, right? Now there's a lot to parse out. So number one, give your player permission to number one, to go if they need to go. Like let them feel okay about going. They might feel guilty about leaving the campaign. They might feel guilty about like exiting the storyline because it might be problematic for you, the DM. Right? That could be hard for them. So give them permission to go if they need to go. Of course, work to fix the problem first too, if it's fixable. That I think is paramount.
Absolutely.
But you're gonna hit, I can't speak to every single situation here. I don't know if every situation is fixable. And you and I talked about this earlier, Addie. I'm like, okay, look, if you have 5 like hardcore metal Satan worshipers that want to play a game that's just bloodthirsty and all about, going to the 9 hells and tearing shit up, and one person at the table just doesn't jive with that, well, maybe that person's got to like pick up another game, right? Maybe it's time for that person to jump into a different scenario in D&D. Yeah. It doesn't mean D&D is not for them, but I mean, I got some metal friends that, probably want to go to the 9 hells and burn some shit.
Where do I sign up for that game?
I mean, the thing is that like D&D can be anything. It's not just limited to one genre. At every session 0, I never decide on the vibe of a campaign before asking my players. At every session 0, I'll say, hey, what kind of game do you want to play? High fantasy, dark fantasy, you want to get scared with some gothic horror? Do you want to do fucking pirates, cowboys, samurai? What do you want to do? What is fun for you? And then every single answer that my players give me, no matter if it's completely different, I will find a way to merge that into something new and fun so that everybody has a good time. I ran a 2-person game last semester where one of my friends said, can we do like a dark fantasy kind of a thing? That sounds fun. And then the other person that was playing said, what if we do like a steampunk? So I took those ideas, put them together, and I gave them a steampunk city in the middle of a desert with insane dark fantasy elements that were added into it as well, because I want to make sure that they're all having fun.
Yeah.
But then in that realm, you got to be like, okay, what kinds of things specifically are you looking for with this game, and what are you not looking for? That kind of conversation of what game do you want to play, probably, for me, it usually takes up most of the session 0. If it's not rolling characters with a new group of players who have never done it before, it's what kind of game do you want?
Yeah, I like that. And I feel like, you're really good in that approach where it's like, what do you want to play, right? It's not about what do I want to give you. It's about what do you want to play. And I also feel like, I think at the end of the day here, one of the key things we're talking about in making your game better around this situation are notions of genuine, open communication.
Yeah.
Right? And understanding that this is a collaborative situation where everyone gets to have a good time. Now, are there going to be problems along the way? Absolutely. Personalities, triggers, storylines that don't create good situations. Yes. But this is how we grow, right? If we don't encounter things that make situations feel strange and then talk about it and say, wait a minute, can we get together after the game for a little while? Because I want to talk about this thing that happened. You got to have a table that's open to that, right? If you're not in a table that is open to that kind of dialogue, run. Okay, that's not the game for you.
But that also speaks to this aspect of like D&D as passive therapy. And I think that's one of the most important things about it is it's collective storytelling, but we also learn a lot about ourselves while playing the game. I mean, if you come to it with this notion of I've created this character, this alternate being that's going to express something, even if it's completely different from what you do every day in your daily life, the way that you play that will tell you something about yourself. And then we're with this group of people where we're all collectively learning something about ourselves in this environment. So I think to that point of communication is absolutely the being generous with each other, being safe with each other, creating that safe space that really allows you to kind of walk away feeling like I got something out of this that is more than just rolling dice and smashing monsters.
And I got to tell you something, and I'm speaking from the standpoint of an artist here, and Eric, I think you're going to agree with me on this, and even you, Addie, as a theater person. When we say creating a safe space, right, I think we're all interested in falling down and getting hurt, because that's where, when there's risk, there's discovery.
Yeah.
That's where we really learn. So we're not talking about a space that is completely void of issue or consequence or conflict. We want those things, but we want them in a space where creativity can flourish without there being an underlying current of disparity.
Yeah.
Right.
I think that's the key.
It's like we're on the holodeck, and we might not die if we get shot, but we'll learn something about it.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, the holodeck's great. Yeah, D&D is holodeck.
Oh yeah. I think one of the greatest conversations about theater I ever had with a teacher was, as art, is it dangerous and should it be? And I think to a certain extent the same thing can be said about D&D. Because if we're looking at it as a piece of content or as a piece of performance art that can be put out there, should it be critiquing of something, be it something that lies within our hearts and minds as the players and people who are running the game? And in that realm, how much of that can we enjoy and envelop into our game and still have fun?
I totally agree. And I think that's a great place to leave off for this episode. All right, people, listen, this has been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed this. I think we can learn a lot from the communicative aspect of this, talking to one another and taking a player or a DM aside after the game, never confrontationally, and just saying, hey, can we have a conversation about what just happened and see where it stands? If there's a lot of pushback and no one wants to address that, well, you know where you stand. But Eric, Addie, I want to thank you both for being on today's episode of iCast Guidance. This was really a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
It was awesome.
This was good. All right, everybody, we will see you next week. Thank you very much for listening, and I'm looking forward to telling you more. We'll have future guests on, and I've got a couple of good ideas up my sleeve, so stay tuned for that. We'll talk to you soon. Take care. All right, everybody. iCast Guidance is produced by Todd Lambrix and Garrett Brennan. Head over to YouTube, where we can be found at Wither and Bloom Studios, where you can see the production of this podcast every Sunday morning live at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We're looking forward to seeing you there. Take care.